Hello, my name is Allison Ziegler, and I am the creator and founder of Allison Ziggy and your host today for Princess Interrupted, the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. We have so much to talk about. A lot has happened this past week, and the theme of today's episode is failure, our favorite topic to discuss, right? So this topic came to me because I ran a half marathon this weekend, and I actually ran the fastest half marathon I've ever run. My goal going into this half marathon was to run in under 2 hours. And I have been training for this half marathon since January. And I've been a runner since around 2021. I ran in high school and I started up again. 2021, this is my fourth half marathon, and I've done one full marathon. I was really nervous going in. I've had an ankle injury that occurred about a year ago. I was nervous because this is the most consistently that I've ever trained for a half marathon. I also don't usually talk about my races. And it was also interesting because it feels like the first time I went in where the stake was time related. The first one that I ran, I just wanted to finish it. The second one, I was training for a full marathon anyway. So again, I wasn't really concerned with time. The third one, I didn't really train for, and it was in Central Park. It was the women's half, and I kind of half-assed it. And then this one, first one I've ever trained for time. I want to run this in under 2 hours. And I set that goal for myself in January of this year. And for reference, at the time of this recording, it's May. I was looking forward to this half marathon for a long time. I've been running 8 miles every weekend since January, joined run clubs, and it feels like the first time that I actually had a sense of community, and I wanted to do well, and I wanted to feel proud of my own performance. I also started focusing on nutrition before this race. I started to pay attention to carbohydrates. I started to pay attention to protein. I started to cut out dairy, gluten. I started to do these things in order to help me for the race, but also to help my body feel good. The context here is this was something that was important to me, that I put in a lot of time and effort to, and I had externally set forth my intentions of what I was looking to accomplish. I felt like this race was really an anchor for me physically for the past few months. And it was just something I'd really worked towards and was looking forward to. And now that it's part of the community, it's part of the friendships that I have, it was an increased desire to do well. It's important to emphasize all of the effort that was put into this, because that, for me, whenever I find that I don't do what I set out to do, is maybe the most disappointing part. We see people sometimes who it's like, oh, well, I didn't really try that hard, kind of like not putting in effort as this badge of honor, when in reality, it's actually a virtue to try regardless of the outcome. But that comes with self-awareness and learning to disassociate your value from your outcomes. I go to this half marathon. I run the race. I'm looking at my watch the entire time, keeping track of my pacing. And I go out first mile, 8 minutes, 30 seconds. It's like, ooh, that was a little bit fast. My best marathon time before this on my watch was 1 hour, 59 minutes, 58 seconds. But then the official time was 2 hours and 3 minutes, or 2 hours and 2 minutes and something to that effect. At the time, that didn't really bother me because I felt I didn't really know if I was going to be able to run it in under 2 hours. And so anyway, I was in a wave that was slower than what I was looking to do. So I had to make up lost time. And so the first few miles that I run this, and the first 4 miles of the race, are all uphill. And I run this race and I do a really amazing job. And I just keep that consistent pacing where it's like the 8:30. And I do that for like the first 3 miles. And then I start to taper down to my normal pace, which is more of like a 9-minute mile. I had this timing band on my wrist that wasn't a watch, but it was a piece of paper. It had the time that you need to be at per mile in order to hit the pace. So I had a 2 hour thing on my wrist. I was referencing that, and I was trying to run under it. And I kept making sure on my watch, it was all good. And so I crossed the finish line. And the only thing that came to mind was just like, I feel so proud of myself. That was just the overwhelming sensation, the overwhelming moment. I crossed the finish line, and the time that was on my watch was like 1 hour, 49 minutes and 48 seconds. The time that was on my official was 2 hours and 28 seconds. And it really messed with my head because on one hand, on my watch and my time on my body, I hit my goal and I had gone a lot faster than however I've ran in the past. But on the official time, I did not hit my goal. And it was so frustrating because it was 28 seconds. I put in so much effort. And it just boiled my blood. And it just made me so angry because I felt like I had put in so much time and so much effort and so much training. But at the same time, the way that we perceive failure, was this a success or was this a failure? I really had to sit and journal with this and really investigate the feeling of like, why am I letting these 28 seconds determine the way that I feel about myself? And just reminding myself, like, this is meant to be fun. I'm someone who grew up with a lot of negative self-talk. I grew up with a narcissistic step parent who was verbally abusive. And so the things that I have going on in my mind, my inner critic, that is something I've had to really work to reprogram. That is something that I have really had to actively take steps towards changing. And the reason that I'm such a proponent of self-love is because I literally hated myself for the first 30 years of my life. Going to Italy was the first trip and that I ever went on by myself. And that was the first time that I learned self-love, where I could show myself compassion and I could do and go and see what I wanted to see without judging myself in any way. Because even if you're with somebody, you're accommodating them. And when I was solo traveling and just accommodating myself, changed my whole perspective, changed my whole life, and taught me the concept of self-love. And so it was really difficult for me when I crossed that finish line, and it was 28 seconds longer than I wanted it to be. I had run the race of my life. I had run faster than I ever had. The last 4 miles, my splits were exactly the same time. I ran the same exact time for 4 miles in a row. If you're a runner, you know consistency is key. And so the splits were really consistent. It came up like under my goal on my watch, not on the goal officially. And I just like, it boiled my blood and kind of tainted the experience because I looked at all the other people who were able to do what I was not able to do. And I just felt like such a failure. And if you're familiar with human design, I know I'm throwing a lot of concepts out here, but I want to give you some illustration of the framework and maybe you can relate if you follow these concepts. I'm a 6-3 profile. I'm a generator. The 3 line is known as trial and error very much heavily in your life. I was so frustrated because I just felt like my whole life is just meant to be me as a failure. I just felt like I fail at everything that I try. I want to read you the inner dialogue that I had after this half marathon. And it's kind of embarrassing to admit this, I guess, because I am a life coach and I help people with this. But again, we teach on what we heal within ourselves. I wrote this on the train leaving Coney Island. I said, it feels like I fail at everything I set out to do. I feel like my intuition lied to me because my intuition told me that I was okay. I just needed to maintain the pace. Like intuitively, it was just keep the pace. And I really thought that when I crossed the finish line, I was going to be at my goal time. And then it boils down to, it makes me feel like I'm not good enough. That is how dark my mind went from running the race of my life where I just had run faster than I ever have, but it was not the goal that I arbitrarily set in my mind. And there was a little bit of comparisonitis of like, why am I not good enough? Like, why was I not able to do this? And I just want to talk about this because even as a life coach, like I can bounce back quickly, but even as I'm talking about this, you can see like there was a polarized charge. There were such heavy emotions behind this. And what I really want to say to myself, to you, is just do not define yourself by these external circumstances that are ultimately irrelevant. They have nothing to do with the core truth of who you are. I pulled up an article. This is from Betterup. They said that failure is termed as a lack of success or the inability to meet an expectation. And so the trouble with failure is that we can read too much into it. We make it mean something about us. We base our worth on it. We base our self-esteem, our self-acceptance. In the example within this article, they even say, imagine yourself in these 3 scenarios and whether you consider yourself to have failed. The very first one they have is an experienced marathon runner sets a goal to run it under a certain time. The goal was 4.5 hours, completes it in 4 hours and 36 minutes, beating her record by 9 minutes. Does that mean she failed or succeeded? So the only difference in the success versus failure is this metric that we're setting in our minds. It's something that we're setting our minds to do. And I believe that goals really have an important purpose, and goals are meant to be a navigation system and they're meant to drive you. And our desires are safe guidance. Our desires are leading us to where we're meant to go. They're showing us the experiences that we're meant to have. My sister, I really owe her a lot of credit because after this, she said to me, "Are you really going to define yourself by 28 seconds? This is all over 28 seconds." And I opened up to her and I was doing it from a deep, detached place where I was still honoring my emotions, where I knew, but it was like something inside, either my subconscious or my heart, still felt this old, outdated belief. And it really brings me to this point where it was like I was identifying as a failure. The way that you see yourself and your image of yourself will determine the outcomes that you receive in your life. It's really hard to talk about this after experiencing something where you can look at it so many different ways. Did I fail? Did I succeed? But at the end of the day, there's a need to separate an outcome from the way you view yourself. If we've had trauma, and so much of this relates back to perfectionism. I was raised to be a perfectionist because I felt like I needed to be perfect in order to avoid punishment. This habit has come into adulthood where I'm running a race. It's with my friends. It's for fun. I got the best time I've ever gotten on the record and on my watch, but something inside was trying to take that away from me. As I was talking to my sister, she even mentioned, you know, you're going to run it in under 2 hours in your lifetime. You know that you have the ability to do this. And that for me really changed the way that I set goals. And I knew this, but experiencing it firsthand really just made it this next level of integrated. One of the participants who enrolled in the planning program in the past, the seasonal planning program, she said to me, I looked back on my goals and they didn't happen. These were goals that my ego was setting, like they didn't happen. I stopped her and I was like, those are my favorite goals to look back on. Because the point of this, it's not a magical process. It's not magical thinking. It's not like if you write something down, it's going to happen. I can provide you with the tools and the resources to believe that it's possible, believe that it's going to happen. But at the end of the day, part of the growth and part of the process is outgrowing the need to set goals from this ego perspective. My ego really wanted to run that marathon in under 2 hours. My ego hated how freaking close we were and the fact that, well, technically you did it, but technically you didn't. My ego hated this. But you know what? My soul gained so much from this experience. And if you're not failing, you're probably not growing. And I learned way more from this experience than if I would have been gallivanting about town because I hit the goal that I arbitrarily set for myself. And that's not to take away from anybody who actually sets out to do a goal and accomplishes it, because that I don't want to discredit those experiences either. I wish I was sitting here and that was the case, but it is not. And so what can I do to make the most of the situation in light of that outcome that would otherwise be negative? Because this happens to a lot of people. And for some people, this could be enough to just give up and stop running. I want to talk about this book that I've started to read. This book has everything to do. It is so wild. I started reading this right after the same day as my marathon. It's called
The New Psycho-Cybernetics.
It reminds me of a Henry Ford quote, which is, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Human beings always act and feel and perform in accordance with what they imagine to be true about themselves and their environments. And this book is just all about self-image. This book is about how the way you see yourself will determine the results that you see in your life. And it talks about the importance of having a positive self-image. One of the exercises that I've done since experiencing all of this, it was really such an important self-reflection exercise to not relate with failure, but to also realize that the purpose of failing is just to grow. This race pushed me to limits that I've never experienced before. I didn't even train hills, and there were 4 miles of hills at the beginning of the race. I had an injury. I could say so many other things and make excuses. But I hope that even by sharing this, you see the vulnerability. Like, this was a really difficult emotional thing that I had to come to terms with as someone who is highly competitive. And again, these are all labels that we place on ourselves. And if there's ever a identifier that you use that does not feel like it's serving you, then you can always choose to release the label. There's a lot of visualization exercises that you do throughout the book. So when you're reading the book, you're visualizing your ideal outcomes. You're seeing yourself representing your ideal qualities. I started to make a list of my own self-image, and I wrote down all of the things about how I want to see myself. And one of the things that I wrote is I want to see myself as a successful person. And so someone who carries themselves as a successful person versus somebody who carries themselves as a failure, two very different energies. If you perceive yourself as a failure, it's very much a, I've already given up. What's the point in trying because I'm not going to accomplish what I'm setting out to do? Someone who sees themselves as successful knows that no matter how many times they fail, they need to keep getting back up because that next time might just work. And they know that the only way to succeed is to keep going. And in the book, there's a really interesting example. It talks about babies and when they're developing. And it talks about how babies, and you can imagine babies with their arms, they're reaching all around their environment and they're picking up and sensing the world. But sometimes they'll reach for things and they'll go to grab them and they won't reach them. And it talks about how as adults, we want to go, we pick up a pencil, we can subconsciously command our internal systems to go and pick up the pencil. But if it's dark and you can't see, you might respond to the environment in the same way that a baby responds, where you're moving your arm around. But think about it, when you're probably failing the most when you're a baby because you're learning at such a rapid rate. And so if you are failing at these things, it just means you're expanding to new levels, you're trying new things. And who's to the next half marathon that I could run, if I didn't heal this within myself, I could set a goal to run it in 1:57. I could run it in 1:58 and feel like a failure. So that's why it's so important to work on the underlying programming that is causing these feelings, because it has nothing to do with the thing itself. The circumstances are ultimately just reflecting back our belief systems to us. Isn't that wild? You can always pick something to be upset about. I want to share another anecdote from the marathon where I was going and I was checking in. You're pre-assigned your wave based on the previous race. And so that half-assed marathon that I did was my time. And so I was automatically in wave 2. Even though based on my time, I would also be in wave 2. I do acknowledge that. Wave 1 was sub 2 hours. I went up to the man who was volunteering and I just asked, well, are there going to be pacers for under 2 hours in wave 2? He's like, no. They start at 2. And so I was like so mad, and I was trying not to be, but I was like, it's just when you care about something and you want to do well and you want to succeed. And I was just so frustrated. And I'm like, breathe, let's let it go. It's not that important. Like, it's not like I'm going to be the first one in this wave. It's not like I'm going to be the fastest person in this wave. And I was thinking about like, there's so many other people who are going to run faster. And so I like rationalized in my mind. Immediately after, somebody goes up to this guy and asks him about the timing of the waves, and he's in wave 1, and he starts complaining about how he has to wake up earlier. And that just reiterated my whole point of it's never about the thing. You can just always choose which energy you want to approach life from. If you're approaching from this situation of, I want to be annoyed, you can find something to be annoyed about. We're allowed to have these feelings and we're allowed to have these experiences, but when you let them control you, when you let them define you, that's when you run into trouble. There was a period of time where packages were getting stolen from my building very regularly. So frustrating. I called Nordstrom to cancel the order. And what had happened was I had ordered pajamas for my plan JAMA at my planner conference. They ran out of the size that I needed, and this person stole my package. I got a refund for them, but I was not able to get the pajamas that I wanted. And I was so frustrated. And I was saying to the woman on the phone, I'm like, I'm so mad. And I was saying it kind of like exactly like I wasn't directing my anger at her. Like it wasn't her fault. It was this person who stole my package. And it was just one of those things. We're freely able to express these things, but it's really important not to direct them at someone else. It's really important to rise above it. It's really important to separate it. It's really important to recognize and to get curious and inquisitive. And that's what I chose to do after this half marathon, was just get really inquisitive and just ask myself, how can I use this situation and this experience for good? How can I ultimately turn this into a success? How can I take this moment and like make it for good? It felt good, but at the same time, I did feel disappointed. And it's okay to feel those things because ultimately we just feel those things because we care. And we care because it's important to us. And it's important to have things that you're striving to do. Like there are so many different measures of success because you can look at anything through any which way. And that's why your self-image and the way that you perceive yourself is ultimately what's the most important. And that's where you can focus your attention. That's where you can focus your time. All of this to say, I am working on improving my self-image to identify as someone who sees herself as successful. And with that, I do believe that I hit my goal. And I'm going to use this as leverage so that I can hit an even more impressive goal the next time that I run a half marathon. I hope that this experience helped you in your own life. My my throat is like, okay, I think we're done talking. I think that's like the extent of what I had to say today. But your journaling exercise today for Princess Interrupted is to write down your self-image. You can write your name and then write down around it all of the qualities that you desire to possess. And so write down all of the qualities that are reflective of the self-image that you are creating for yourself. That is your journaling assignment for this week. Go ahead and share it with me. If you want, you can tag me on Instagram at Allison Ziggy. I'm also active on TikTok at Allison Ziggylicious. The video content's under Ziggylicious as well as YouTube. And I am also opening up enrollment for my one-on-one coaching. This is a special opportunity before we gear up for the summer launch. So I would love to work with you if you're looking to up-level your life in your career, your relationships, your self-image, your self-love. I'm your girl. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And I can't wait to join you next week for Princess Interrupted.